question philosophical counseling. Many of us are
Actually, Professor Rakesh,
yes.
you are not properly audible. Your voice is breaking.
Okay, what did I do?
Probably you should switch off your video. Please switch off your video so that we can hear you properly. You are not clear at all. I'm sorry.
Okay. Hear me now? Can you hear me now, Victor?
Yes.
Still the same.
So, yes, thank you very much. So, once again, I welcome you all to this lecture series, which is organized by the Department of Philosophy. Our department is an old department with has special focus on philosophical analysis. We are indeed very grateful to Professor Balaganapathi for agreeing to talk to us today on the sunrise area of philosophical counseling. The world over, this has come now as a sunrise area, in a sunshine area in which people are seeking many opportunities for themselves for the promotion of philosophy, as well as to see the contribution of philosophy to larger mankind. I hope that all the people who are listening to this will greatly benefit from Professor Balaganapathi's initiation. For the past 2 years, he has also tied up with the international agencies and started training a large body of young people over here in philosophical counseling. As he knows, some of us are more conservative. I am, in fact, one of the most conservative, perhaps, who keep on wondering about the cartography of what we call professional philosophy. Of course, philosophy as a worldview, philosophy as engaged with multiple perspectives on life, our views which are legitimate and have long histories. Also, there has been a view, both in India and the West, that primarily the task of the philosopher is to analyze and to review, which is the task of Anveksha. I am very happy that actually philosophical counseling, in fact, builds upon this notion. And as we all know, even philosophical analysis actually drew the term analysis both from chemical analysis and psychoanalysis. From chemical analysis in terms of splitting the problem into smaller parts, and from psychoanalysis, the idea that actually once you analyze your problem into smaller parts and try to see the interconnections, in most cases, the problem gets resolved. Psychological counseling, as it is now coming up, I think we will be wiser after this deliberation. We all wonder how the empirical nature of actual engagement and lives touch philosophy, because many of us do believe that the primary concern is how to lead a happy life, and all our theorizations in philosophy are related to it. But psychoanalysis, psychotherapy are well-known areas. Philosophical counseling is a new area, or it may be perhaps a continuation of the old area of where we thought about Socrates as a great counselor. Ironical though it might be, because he managed to embarrass more people than to help people. But certainly we have a long history, maybe a good counsel which fools, helps people to resolve, maybe the kind of thing, all of that will come forward. I once again, and I also wish to thank Dr. Prashant Shukla, who spoke to Professor Balaganapathi. Dr. Prashant Shukla has also been trained in philosophical counseling. My very, very dear colleague who passed away due to COVID, Kali Charan Pandey, was also very, very keen on philosophical counseling, and we have been now looking forward to more opportunities. The Vice Chancellor of Lucknow University also seems to be interested in it, and maybe in the coming session we will have a paper on philosophical counseling as a part of our coursework. We hope that this will be a beginning of many, many learning opportunities for us, and Professor Balaganapathi will be kind enough to guide us through the development of the course and also help us further. So may I now request been to these. May I now request Professor Dr. Krishna to give a formal introduction to Dr. Balaganapathi.
Thanks a lot to all for joining in this humble attempt of ours. Philosophical the emerging discipline for the people of philosophy. We are trying to take the discipline to our day-to-day experiences and sorting out dilemmas, confusions, ambiguity in our normal understanding through taking assistance from some of the stalwarts in the field. We all would like to thank first of all Professor Bala, because he was one of the first people who started and invited us to enter into the discipline. Of course, it was a very enriching experience. Now the challenge in front of us is to make it popular and invite more and more people in the philosophy for this interesting and going popular discipline. It has been a privilege to have Professor Bala. He is head of Department of Philosophy in Delhi University. It was really my privilege to be associated with him for the last couple of years, and I assure you I learned a lot from him. And I presume that through this lecture series, we all will get immensely benefited by his exposure, by his expertise, and by his experience in the field. Respected sir, the dais is all yours now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Rakesh, Shah, for the kind words. Before I begin to say anything, I would like to pay homage to my dear friend from the University of Professor K.C. Pandey. I cherish the memories of the interaction with him. I really feel very sorry that he lost the battle with COVID quite unfortunately. My homage to Professor K.C. Pandey. So, good afternoon, friends, and dear friend, I don't know whether I can say friend because he's like my teacher, Professor Rakesh Chandra, and Krishna, and other colleagues from the Department of Philosophy at Lakshmi University, and other friends that I see from various parts of the country who have joined us, and my colleagues from the university, colleges, and the department. Good afternoon to all of you. I don't know whether I will succeed or I will disappoint you, but let me take an attempt. Okay. Firstly, I would like to congratulate the Department of Philosophy at Lakshmi University for thinking of including philosophical counseling as in undergraduate program. That's what Dr. Prashant has told me, and I really feel very happy that this movement of philosophical counseling is slowly reaching every part of the country. And I saw our good friend from Kerala University here. She is heading the Department of Center for Philosophical Counseling at Kerala University. And I see friends from other parts of the country who are also involved in philosophical counseling. So it's really a good audience that I see around me. Thank you so much for all of you joining us. I also assume that the very purpose with which I am invited is to talk to the students who are going to join philosophical counseling. So I understand the diversity of the student group that we have. So that is how I try to keep the lecture as light as possible without going into the debates and complicated things that are existent in the discourse of philosophical counseling, though I would be touching upon them. And the process, I would also, I should also submit to Professor Rakesh Chandra that I am also a kind of conservative, but I don't know how far your conservatism and my conservatism match. But yeah, of course, as you said, the analysis part of any problem that is given, if you analyze psychological by going by psychological therapy, we can get to resolve it, which is also, I think, Thomas Hobbes adopted this method of resolutive compositive method. You resolve a problem and then into its basic parts and then recompose them. And through that, you can resolve the problem. That's what Thomas Hobbes argues. It is true, but what philosophical counseling basically tries to tell us is that not just the resolving the problem, but the articulation of the resolving, the process of resolving by the individual, and also rearticulation in recomposing the problem is the one. So the articulation is more important on the perspective of the individual. That in fact helps the individual in resolving the problem than merely analyzing and splitting it into various parts. That is the crucial leap that we see when we look at philosophical counseling and relate it to other things that we were talking about. So having said that, and another important thing, because Professor Rakesh Chandra has said that, I'm trying to respond to that. With regard to this empirical nature, even I have suspicions about that. So I may not be properly touching that aspect. So friends, coming back to the theme that is given to me, in fact, I have also chosen that. Philosophical counseling for solving problems in personal and public domain. This is the theme that is that we have for today. I would begin this talk first by talking about what is philosophical counseling and how do I look at it. And secondly, I would try to address whether it is an old one or is it a new one, and how do we look at it in relation to other disciplines that we have. And thirdly, I would try to address what is the purpose of philosophical counseling. Is it merely problem solving? And that is how I enter into the domain of problem solving, individual problem solving and public domain problem solving. So this is how I structured my talk. And I was told that I can speak for 40 minutes. I'll try to restrict myself to 40 minutes. So please bear with me. Firstly, my concern is what is philosophical counseling. So this is what I want to begin with. When I say I would like to address this issue of what is philosophical counseling, I hope I am audible, right? My voice is clear?
So not very clear.
Not very clear?
There's some disturbance, some kind of resonance.
I think a fan or something at the back.
If you please switch off your fan, it will be nicer.
Just 1 minute. Is it clear now?
Now it's very
Am
nice.
Thank you.
Yes, very clear.
Very clear?
Now.
Sorry for that. No,
Thank you.
I was trying to be techno savvy and try to use the earbuds, and I understood that's nonsense. Instead of facilitating it, it's disturbing us. I'm going to begin with what is philosophical counseling. When I try to address this concern of philosophical counseling, I believe that the first thing that we have to address is what is philosophy. How did we understand philosophy? So only then we would be able to understand what is philosophical counseling. So that is how I begin with. I would begin with what is philosophy, and then I will also talk about what philosophical counseling can do and what philosophical counseling cannot do. Because I believe by clarifying these things, we understand what is philosophical counseling. So that is how. Let me begin with what is philosophy. How do we understand philosophy? In general, we teach our students, and we also tend to begin this way, that philosophy means love of wisdom, right? So that's the quest for knowledge and love of wisdom, right? This is how we begin our introduction of philosophical counseling, and we believe that knowing, the very act of knowing, involves an enterprise of philosophizing. So that is how we seem to be orienting philosophy. Even if you take it in terms of Indian conception of philosophy as darshana, it seems to have more epistemological orientations of whether metaphysical reality or empirical reality, whatever it may be. But the orientation seems to be epistemological. But it is not the only way of understanding philosophy that we find in the history of philosophy, whether it is in India or elsewhere. So what are the other alternative ways of looking at philosophy is something that really instigated me to give space for philosophical counseling the way we are understanding it today. So that prompts me to look at the history and find that philosophy is also understood or explained in terms of a way of life by French philosopher Pierre Hadot. He explains it in terms philosophy in terms of way of life. So it's not a mere epistemological enterprise. Rather, it helps us to be in different ways, to be under quote unquote for me. So we tend to be in the life in different ways. That be is very important to me, and this be is not just a passive be, okay, of receiving everything from various ends. This be of the individual, being of the individual, is not mere a passive one. It is rather an active one in the sense that it is mutually affecting. So that is how, when we say philosophy is a way of life, we are not just saying that it is casual way of life. What we are saying is you as an individual is involved in the life as a being, and this being is not a passive kind of one which receives, and it is an active kind of one which mutually affects. And this is how philosophy is not just a regular mere epistemological enterprise, rather it is a co-creative activity as well. So this co-creative activity is very important to me, and this co-creativity, when I mention this co-creativity, I'm not saying that something else is created from elsewhere. This co-creative capacity is inherent to human beings. In fact, those friends who are familiar with the scientific terminology these days, there is an interesting concept that is being used for human beings as autopoiesis. Right? Autopoiesis means an organism which uses its own material, and that is how it creates itself and it maintains itself. So it is self-creating, self-regulating, self-maintaining mechanism which creates by using its own resources. Okay, so that is how we see human being these days. But there are new versions of understanding human being as well that have come into picture, which are very important and significant, which have very important and significant place for philosophical counseling, in the sense that something that is opposite of autopoiesis is allopoiesis. Where, see, for example, if you understand a cell, human cell or living cell to be autopoiesis, because it uses its own material and it is also self-creating and self-regulating. The opposite of that, allopoiesis, is something that is like a factory which requires materials from outside and which is to be maintained by the human beings and which is to be like created by the human being. So completely it is the opposite of autopoiesis. But when we look at philosophical counseling, how I look at philosophical counseling is not as a mechanism of autopoiesis, but rather a mechanism of symbiosis. Okay, symbiosis is basically symbiosis tries to stress that it is a collective creation. Okay, so when we are talking about philosophy, it is a collective creation. That is how I use the word co-creativity here. So we all interact and try to collectively create and develop it further. That is one way of understanding or looking at philosophy. Okay, these are a couple of ways through which we try to understand philosophy. And the other important point here that we have to note is philosophy is also understood sometimes, not always, as life-changing. Okay, especially when when it is addressed to the relational aspects of human life with the other could be non-human other or human other or cosmic other, whatever that we can assume. So in that particular instance or perspective, philosophy is also understood to be something that is transformative of the individual life. And philosophy, of course, is also understood sometimes in terms of problem solving. Okay, so these are various conceptions of understanding of philosophy that we find in the history of philosophy. It is not that we are digging it, we are taking it from elsewhere. No, this is a part of the history of philosophy itself. So this helps us a little in understanding the place of philosophical counseling. So that's why I'm trying to talk about them. And the questions regarding the practice of philosophy, or sometimes some people argue that philosophical practice is a kind of misnomer. It cannot be used. Philosophy is a second order discipline, so it cannot be taken to be something that is directly related to the practicalities of life. This is how some people view it and criticize philosophical practice as well. So for me, since we looked at the history and understood that it is explained in various ways, there is a space, whether you recognize it or not, there is some form of space for this kind of philosophizing as well. Okay, that's what I want to stress here. And that is how I would argue that philosophy encompasses theoretical, practical, and procedural aspects of human life as well. I'm not just limiting it to theoretical or practical. I am also stressing this procedural one. When I say this, philosophy, theoretical aspects, especially when I talk about that, the metaphysical and epistemological aspects come into the picture. And when we look at practical aspects, you can bring in ethics, because it's about human behavior. And procedural, I would use logic to address this procedural aspects, how thought process has to be processed. So this is how I consider it to be a combination of all these three. And something might have got stressed at a particular point of time, and something might have got stressed in some other philosopher. So this is how I look at it, and that is how this quotation that I read somewhere seems to be very important to me in this regard. The concepts and categories with which people think deeply affect their lives. So if you keep on thinking about a particular concept and a category, it deeply affects your life, practical life, and that is how it has a practical utility. And in that particular sense, philosophy is also a kind of practice. And what it can do is something that is very important. Having explained or delved into what philosophy is, the other important aspect that I would like to touch is what it can do. Okay. So all of us, as Professor Rakesh Chandra has mentioned, all of us seem to be fascinated, or all of us want and desire happy life. And none of us deny that. No? Wherever you are, in whatever situation you are, and wherever category, whichever category, social category or political category, whatever you may be, all of us desire and want happy life. It's not just happy life. We also desire sometimes good life, and we also look for something that is satisfying. Okay. See, all these three have to be there. We look for good life, we look for happy life, we also look for satisfying life. But if somebody asks you, what do you mean by good life, and what do you mean by happy life, and what do you mean by satisfying life, most of the times we ourselves may not be clear about what we mean by these. Okay, and if the complications would be enormous when somebody has to choose a particular course of action that leads him to the combination of all the three: good life, happy life, and satisfying life. Okay, so every time, whenever you feel like you want a happy life, we have to ask this question, like, what is this happy life, which is a kind of satisfying one, and which is a kind of good one. So this is a very complicated thing, and most of the times, though we use verbally that we want happy life, we don't epistemologically we don't try to reflect on it and try to reach out to what we mean by that. I'm not talking about what it is. Okay, I only situate it within the human epistemology, the individual epistemology. We will not be clear about what it is. So if you are not clear about what it is, how do you? No, but still you aspire for it, you want it, you desire it. So this problem that we find, in recognizing, in possessing a concept and possessing a concept as a goal, and then not being clear about what it is there is a big leap that I find, which I call, in fact, I was writing a paper where I am talking about what is it? Lag, philosophical lag. Okay, applying it on philosophical counseling, there would be a big lag between these two, like jet lag. Okay, and this lag is to be built, and this lag is to be bridged. And how do we do that? Do we have any mechanism for that? So that's where philosophical counseling comes into picture and tries to help us. And in fact, friends, if you look at any of these disciplines that we have, take science and technology, or human sciences, or social sciences, humanities, let me use humanities, not sciences, humanities and social sciences, all of them in one way or the other tries to address the issue of good life, or happy life at least, if not the good life, happy life. Okay, so all of them are concerned with happy life, but what they look at when they try to look at happy life is through extrinsic things. So it is only philosophy which tries to address happy life in terms of its individual's intrinsic human nature, not taking completely the extrinsic things into consideration, not taking them alone. So this is the difference that we have to understand, which makes the place of philosophy very crucial in making the individual look at and aspire for happy life, which is at once good and satisfying as well. It helps the individual to identify, this philosophical counseling helps the individual to identify and understand what is good, happy, and satisfying life for him. Life for him. That's a very important thing to me. But the question is, how is it possible? Is it possible at all? How can you make, see, if the individual doesn't know what is good life to him, then can you make him understand it? And if individual already knows, has a concept of happy life and going ahead with that, are you trying to impose your own on him and trying to tell him that this is not the good life that you are looking, that you already have understood, and what is good life is something that I would prescribe to you, as it is happening in the case of most of the Babas that we have. I'm not making a sweeping generalization by saying that all Babas are bad, but I'm saying most of the Babas that we have seen in the recent past have tried to sell their own commodity of happiness to everyone and saying that this is the happiness for all of you as well, right? So that I'm not subscribing to such kind of a view. So that is how is it possible to reach or help the individual in understanding what is good and happy here? See, basically, this is where the kind of importance, significance that philosophical counseling is to be stressed. It helps the client to understand and be aware of his own hidden biases in his cognition. Okay, so how does it help the individual to understand is what is good life for him? Okay, and what is satisfying life to him? This happens in the form of helping the individual to understand and be aware of and understand the hidden biases of the cognition. The way you look at the world, the way you cognize the world, the way you cognize a relation, the way you cognize an individual, a reality, a situation, all these are sometimes endowed with certain biases. Okay, so these cognitive biases ought to be made aware of, so that you would see, only if you are aware of something, then you would try to see whether it is right or appropriate or inappropriate, and only then you would be able to resolve it if it is inappropriate. So there are certain biases, that cognitive biases that most of us carry with us, which we are not even aware of. So this philosophical counseling tries to help the individuals to reach out to such kind of cognitive biases. And also there are certain unspoken assumptions with which all of us live, with regard to people as well as relations. Because when you look at human life, there is a difference between world and life. What is world? World is something that is, if you understand world to be something that is given, and then what is life is how the individual person interacts with what is that something that is already given, and this interaction is the one which gives us a chance to understand it to be life. Okay, if there is no interaction at all, then it is difficult to understand that to be life. So I am not denying that the individual will not possess life in the sense that he doesn't possess prana, but what I mean to say is the life as we understand it in the contemporary times is the relation that one builds with the given. So in that particular aspect, the relations and relations with the people are very important, and there are certain unspoken assumptions with which we carry forward, and these unspoken presuppositions, assumptions are to be understood and made aware of by the individual so that he can understand the relations in a better way. Okay, so that his dispositions would be in a better way. And the other important thing is the conflicting values. Philosophical counseling, how it helps in identifying the individual, what is good life to him, is by addressing conflicting values with which the individual carries forward. Okay, most of the times this happens to all of us, I assume. Like we will have a particular kind of value for others, and when it comes to us, we don't subscribe to that. We use a different kind of value. And sometimes for the same situation, different situations for us, for ourselves, we assume different values, and that is how we land up in a conflict within ourselves, which makes us lose our peace of mind. So such kind of conflicting values with which we carry forward in our life is also very important in our conflicting values in our practice and behavior. And these are the things which philosophical counseling tries to help the individual in understanding so that he can reach out to what is good life and what is better life for himself. And when I say all these things, what I also mean is, what I also want to stress is, not all concerns of human life can be reduced to, this is another important aspect that I want to stress here. Not all concerns, all of us have different kind of concerns in our life, and not all concerns can be reduced to biological or physical in nature. And similarly, you cannot reduce every concern of individual to a mental or psychological concern only. Okay, so if that is the case, if we are accepting that not all problems are I'm visible, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. If not all concerns are purely biological, limited to biological domain alone, and if not all concerns are limited to psychological domain alone, then we are recognizing that there is a domain beyond these two as well. Okay, so that is where philosophical counseling comes into picture. So when I am saying this, I am clearly trying to say that philosophical counseling, when we are advocating philosophical counseling, when people are talking about philosophical counseling, it is not that they want to enter into the domain of physicians or the medical practitioners that we have around us. And it is also not that they are encroaching into the domain of psychologists or psychiatrists. Okay. But at the same time, I also stress this point that, see, knowledge, when we take knowledge to be a holistic domain, every field of knowledge is only a part of that, and each one is supposed to interact with the other and take the wisdom of the other disciplines into consideration so that it can enrich itself. So that is how I see people do talk about the relation between psychology and philosophy. Of course, psychology was a branch of philosophy some time back, and because of its positivist inclination, it has become an independent discipline, and it enriched itself, and it is also contributing richly to it is contributing richly to human life, happiness of human life. And given that philosophy is doing its own enterprise, and I believe probably this philosophical counseling itself can be can branch out in a similar way, because most of us or people who look at the development of philosophy would see that various branches of knowledge that we see now are branched out of philosophy. That's how people assume, and that is how we call the doctoral PhD to be doctor of philosophy in various disciplines. So if you take that to be the situation so far, then probably philosophical counseling can also emerge to be an independent discipline later on. And if it gets inclined towards this empirical nature more, okay, if it gets into that, probably it may branch out as well. But what I'm trying to say here is this, since not all concerns can be reduced to biology and psychology, there are certain concerns which are left outside the domain, which are to be recognized, which are also very important for the human life, and which are contributing to the happiness and goodness of human life, which are unaddressed. And this domain is rich, and this domain is not is unattended so far. And that's what prompts philosophers who are looking at philosophical practice to venture into the domain and understand the domain, and then address the concerns and see whether philosophy can do something to that. Okay, I'm not saying that philosophy can do everything. I'm not saying that philosophical counseling can resolve the problems of the world like this. But I'm saying there are certain concerns which philosophical counseling alone address. Okay, and I am also saying that there are certain certain concerns which philosophical counseling can address along with other disciplines. So this nature is to be properly understood when we look at this discipline of philosophical counseling. So philosophical counseling in a way tries to help us in resolving the moral life conflicts. Okay, when you come across, somebody may ask me what kind of problems would be there, which only philosophers or philosophers can address. So I would say resolving the moral life conflicts in such kind of situations. Definitely it is a trained philosopher who would be a better person than a mere psychologist or somebody else. So in the similar way, problems of uncertainty in life. So we are still into this pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, and those who got infected and who were in isolation for 14 days and 21 days, they would clearly understand how they felt about their life to be quite uncertain. No, not just the people who got infected, but those who were living with them and who were watching them, who are looking at them and their relatives. Most of us, in fact, nobody in the world, I would feel, has not got affected by philosophical counseling. If this is the case, all of us have understood the uncertainty of life, and we understood that medicine cannot help us. Okay, there is no medicine, ready-made medicine for COVID-19. So you leave out that, and then there is a psychological problem, but it is not merely a psychological problem as well. Then it is definitely and clearly the philosophical domain that is to be addressed. And in fact, I have counseled many clients who got infected and whose relatives of the infected patients in this situation, and their concern is the uncertainty of life, and how do we address them, how do we help them, is the domain of philosophical counseling. And the issues of meaning, purpose and value of life, these are very important, which in fact I don't know how many of you would clearly understand this. When we get up in the morning, right, all of us were in lockdown for a long time, right? Delhi, we just came out of lockdown 1 week back, right? We were continuously for 2 months we were under lockdown, and last year, of course, many months. So when you have to get up from the bed, you have to have a purpose of life. Otherwise, you don't even feel like getting up, right? So the value of life, meaning of life, is so important for us. That is the one which drives us to go further. So if you think that suddenly life is worthless and life has no purpose and no meaning, then you may be a CEO of a corporate or Ambani or whoever it may be. But once you start feeling that life has become meaningless, then there is no further go in this regard, with regard to your life. So it affects everyone. No, I always say this to my students as well, that see, all of us come across crisis situations in our life, and I have come across, and I'm sure many of you might have come across a crisis situation. Crisis, I mean, like a situation where you felt that there is no way to go, right? And you feel that you're completely tied up and you cannot go anywhere. So most of us have faced such kind of situations, and those who are lucky, those who are who have sufficient resources within themselves have come out of such kind of situations, and some of us have taken the help of others and come out of such kind of situations. But there may be few people who might not have got any help, and who might have ended their lives, right? So this aspect of meaning of life is very important, and which is very disturbing to the people who are into such kind of a situation. And in such kind of situations, it's not giving drugs, or it's not mere psychological counseling that helps. It is rather philosophical counseling that can play a crucial role. And also, it helps. Philosophical counseling helps in addressing undetermined and inconsistent belief systems that we often carry. When we act in the world, we act because we have a particular kind of belief system that is operating in our epistemology, okay, and worldview that is operating in our epistemology. And this epistemology is the one which prompts us to act in a particular way in the society. And if this belief system is wrongly construed, then your behavior and your way of acting in the world gets affected by that, and that really that is to be addressed, right? Most of the times we are not aware of such kind of things. Most of the times we don't feel that we have to address it at the level of belief system. But such kind of underdetermined and inconsistent belief systems ought to be addressed in a proper way, and that again only philosophy can help us in addressing them. So these are certain things that I believe which are very important, which we have to know. That is so when the question comes like who would be the clients of philosophical counselors, this is the question that we often come across. And some of our practitioners also say that we are not getting the clients, but who are the clients? That is the question, right? See here, in fact, I should read what Lou Marinoff had said, but anyway, let me not read that. He says, Lou Marinoff, the American Philosophy Practitioners Association's director, and also a well-known philosophical counselor who has written many good works on philosophical counseling, and he is also running a journal called Philosophical Practice. He wrote, philosophical counseling is a therapy of the sane. Okay, it's not for the when we hear this philosophical counseling, especially the term counseling, we think that the other is a patient, a sick person, a patient. But philosophical counseling is required not just for sick people or patients. Philosophical counseling, all of us may require philosophical counseling. Even I require a philosophical counselor to help me. And in fact, I have attended certain sessions with my own colleagues who are trained in philosophical counseling, and that really helped me in looking at my own hidden biases in a better way. Okay, unless somebody tells you, you will not recognize that. You would think that it is fine. You would think that you are autopoiesis. Okay, you would be correcting yourself, so I don't have to worry. But actually, it's not autopoiesis that you can correct your hidden biases. What is required is your symbiosis, your being of symbiotic being, which is a collective creation, and the other's intervention is required to make you understand your hidden biases. So that is how Lou Marinoff argues that it is a therapy for the sane. That is how, who can be the client? All of us, any of us. Okay, and it is not that once you have crossed the struggle or crisis, you need not require philosophical counseling at all. Philosophical counseling may require at any point of time, as many times as possible, and that is how, who can be the client? A rational, functional, and definitely not a mental ill one. Okay, so we assume that the other person is rational enough to understand and enter into a dialogue and understand the complications or intricacies of what he is saying. And he, when explained further and when provoked further, he himself would understand what is the problem that is going on for him, and that is how he has to be rational enough in understanding, or at least being self-reflective. Okay, that is the first one. And second one is he should be functional. Otherwise, it is not possible to go for philosophical counseling. And obviously, at least Lou Marinoff believes that mentally ill patients cannot be taken for philosophical counseling. So he also, Lou Marinoff, he wrote a very interesting article, what philosophical counseling cannot do, because he has been in the fray for a long time. So he faced these questions again and again on different domains. So he wrote a paper, what philosophical counseling cannot do. And he writes, he lists out 6 or 7 points where he mentions about it cannot diagnose. No, it's not diagnosis that you find in philosophical counseling. And it is, and obviously, philosophical counseling cannot address the concerns of cerebral and physical illness. And mental illness is also not the domain of philosophical counseling. And it cannot, interestingly, what he says is, it cannot predict its success in every case. It is not that philosophical counseling can predict its success in every case, and it is similarly, it cannot even address or predict its failure in every case, right? And the last point that he makes there is very important, because people often talk about philosophical counseling in relation to the other that we have. He argues that something that philosophical counseling cannot do is it cannot establish disregard of any other counseling mechanisms. So it doesn't really establish any disregard for other counseling mechanisms as well. So these are the things which clarify a lot about what philosophical counseling cannot do and what philosophical counselor is not attempting to do. So keeping I think I'll try to conclude in another, say, 10-15 minutes, Prashant, if I'm allowed. So the other important aspect that I want to look at, that I have already mentioned, is it an old discipline or is it a new wine, old wine in the new bottle kind of one? This kind of questions that we come across often. So I thought I should address this as well. See, I'm not for making sweeping generalizations saying that everything falls under the domain of philosophical counseling. Often we come across people from our own discipline, philosophy, saying that everything is philosophy. So I don't belong to such kind of a group. And at the same time, I don't belong to the other group which tries to narrow philosophy to only armchair philosophizing. Okay, so these two are two completely extreme situations, and what I look for, like following Buddha's advice, that I look for middle path where the practice and theory try to come together. The praxis is very important, and that's I really look for the middle path, and that is how I will not subscribe to the view that everything is philosophical practice. Okay, starting from Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, and whatever that you find in the text is philosophical counseling, kind of philosophical counseling. Even in Western tradition, no, I'm not going to stress that. I'm not going to subscribe to such kind of a view. And at the same time, you cannot reduce it to only one perspective. So these two are to be avoided. Only then we will be able to understand philosophical counseling in a better way. So when I say this, I am also saying that you cannot say that the whole of history of philosophy is an attempt to practice philosophy. So when I say that, I'm obviously saying that I'm obviously addressing the concern that we have raised, whether it is an old wine in the new bottle. Okay, so but I try to maintain that there are instances of philosophical counseling that we can find in the history of philosophy, whether it is Eastern or Western or whatever it may be. Okay, which from the contemporary perspective we can recognize and we can understand them to be philosophical counseling, aspects of philosophical counseling, tools of philosophical counseling, methods of philosophical counseling, instances of philosophical counseling. So that is what we try to identify and also try to take inspiration from them. Okay, that is how there is a very interesting question that we have faced some time back. Like, is it that the past history or past philosophers are being just used for the sake of philosophical counseling in the contemporary times? No, they are used in the sense that they are brought in here, but who is using it? The philosophical counselor is using it by using his own creativity and bringing creativity into picture. So that is very important. Unless that happens, it's not just prescribing a medicine, prescribing Socrates for a problem and Descartes for another problem. It doesn't happen that way, right? So that is another important aspect that we have to look at. We can identify in various cultures and various traditions instances of philosophical counseling, and we can definitely take inspiration from them and re-articulate them as per the contemporary concerns that we have, and we can help them. And similarly, when I say this, what I mean is, if you look at the Indian tradition or ancient Greek tradition, you would definitely come across a quest for self-knowledge in both the traditions. Probably from a completely different perspective, we find who am I? In Koham, in Indian tradition, Upanishadic tradition, and similarly we find know thyself, know yourself in Socratic statements, and similarly by Epicurus, who argues for therapy of soul, philosophy to be therapy of soul, and even Descartes talks in terms of practice of wisdom, and Nietzsche argues for philosopher physician, in fact. So these are very interesting instances that you come across when you look at history of philosophy, which try to seem to be hinting philosophical counseling, importance of philosophical counseling. But in the modern context, contemporary context, the demands of a fresh perspective have come into picture, and for the articulation of philosophical counseling. And Gerd Achenbach, in 1981, is said to be the founder of modern philosophical practice, modern way of understanding philosophical practice as we perceive it now. He's from Germany. And then we have various scholars like Lou Marinoff and Ran Lahav and Cohen Elliott, many other scholars who have come. And now the domain is very rich and diverse, and people are contributing richly to that, and all of us also should know about it, and if possible should contribute to the development of it. In fact, American Philosophy Practitioners Association, we, Dr. Prashant and me, both of us are trained by American Philosophical Practitioners Association, and they have given us an opportunity to bring a special volume on Indian perspectives of philosophical counseling, in which we have contributed articles, and it is available in the public domain for consumption. So I would be happy if any of you can read those articles and respond to them. So taking the discussion further, there are different forms of philosophical counseling that we talk about. It is not that philosophical counseling, is it only for the individuals, or is it beyond the individuals? This is the point that comes into picture. And this is where usually now, as it is being practiced in the contemporary times, philosophical counseling is for the individual clients, and it is also for the groups that is being practiced. And even for the corporates and business houses, philosophical counseling is being used. In fact, I was surprised recently when I was in a global platform on philosophical counseling. I met two people who said they are appointed by a big company in their country as chief philosophy officers, CPO. I was surprised because in India you don't. It's difficult to understand it that way. Find such kind of a position in a company, but in Russia and in some of the European countries, I found this position, chief philosophy officer, who is a very well-paid person. Okay, so basically, when people look at whether it is individual or group or a business house, corporate or business house, what is it that they are looking at by involving philosophical counseling is improving the performance of the individual and improving the performance of the corporate house that is recruiting them, and basic concern for them is quality of happiness and peace of mind. They believe that if there is a philosophical counseling session available for their employees, they started believing that the quality of peace of mind and quality of happiness would be rich, which contributes to the quality of the work that the individual can do in the business house. And that is how they also, other important point when I was interviewing some of them, they told me is that the possibility of the conflict. See, conflict resolution is the secondary kind of one. Reducing the possibility of the conflict is the precautionary kind of one. And even that way, they said philosophical counseling has helped many of its employees, and that is how they are able to pay good remuneration so that the business houses run smoothly. So that is how they contribute to the overall well-being of or good and satisfying life of the individual as well as the business house. And that is how philosophical counseling has been playing a very crucial and important role in Europe and American countries. Even in Japan, especially. Okay, Japan in Asian countries is an exception where philosophical counseling is being used very well now. There are three. Another important aspect with which I would end my talk is the crucial one in the title itself, that is that we have for today, like solving the problems. So, what is the purpose of philosophical counseling? When we ask this question, the answers can be many. Some people argue that philosophical counseling has to solve the problems. Okay, and when we say solving the problems, solving the individual problems, solving the group problems, solving the problems of the country, globe, whatever, you can extend it anywhere. So whether philosophical counseling is only problem solving, okay, is the question. And even in the title of the talk, we have mentioned that problem solving, philosophical counseling for solving problems of personal and public domain. So when we say philosophical counseling can solve problems, we are not limiting philosophical counseling to problem solving domain alone, okay? Because philosophical counseling is a larger one, okay? And within which problem solving is only one aspect, okay? Because we see philosophical counseling, purpose of philosophical counseling to be twofold at least. One is problem solving, the other one is process oriented, okay? So let me explain what is this. See, when all of us understand problem solving, like there is a given problem at a particular point of time for an individual, and how do I come out of that problem? If it is a moral conflict or if it is a cognitive bias, how do I come out of that? You can have a discussion with a philosophical counselor and you can resolve it. So this is problem solving. You have one problem and it is resolved, and that is how you go further. No, in the contemporary world, we only look for such kind of things where you get an instant solution, you get the solution, you take the medicine, and then the problem is solved, right? But that is only one aspect of philosophical counseling. The other important aspect is process-oriented. What do we mean by process-oriented one? See, all of us intrinsically, all individuals, all human beings, intrinsically, they think that there is something that, a kind of dissatisfaction that is there in the life, and they want to come out of that, but they don't know how to do that. The question of meaning of life. So meaning of life cannot be addressed at like problem-solving kind of one, right? It is a process. Understanding the meaning of life is a process. Meaning of life of oneself is a process. There should be a continuous self-evaluation and self-assessment that goes on, and that is how philosophical counseling, the purpose of philosophical counseling is process-oriented as well. So these are two different kind of ones, and in fact, most of the philosophers, let me tell you, the first philosopher that I said, Gerd Achenbach from Germany, he argues that philosophical counseling should not be problem-oriented. Okay, and along with him joins Professor Ran Lahav. He also argues that philosophical counseling is not problem-solving kind of one. Okay, it is basically a process-oriented one. It requires deep philosophy. He advocates something called deep philosophy, which is transformative in nature, that happens in the form of a process. It doesn't happen overnight. So that's what Ran Lahav advocates, and you can attend to his deep philosophy sessions. He offers on online mode as well, which are very useful, right? So I'm just trying to make you understand the distinction between problem-oriented and process-oriented. And the second kind of distinction that we find in with regard to the purpose of philosophy is goal-oriented and open-ended. So this problem-solving kind of ones are completely goal-oriented in the sense that you have a particular goal which you try to achieve, and sometimes in the process-oriented philosophy, philosophical counseling is most of the times open-ended, right? Which means you don't know when what is the goal, so you just try to improve yourself step by step. And in fact, I have addressed the concerns of both kinds of clients, so I can clearly see the distinction between them. No? One tries to achieve the goal immediately, right? Like fast food kind of one. The other one wants to slowly try to understand himself and move further in the process of realizing what he means by life and what are the hidden assumptions that he has, and try to transform himself. So these are the two things that we find with regard to the purpose of philosophical counseling. And we have like when it comes to problem solving of personal, individual oriented ones, as I have already mentioned, the moral conflicts, people with moral conflicts come into the picture, and people with problems of uncertainty of life. Okay, so this is the one in the recent past, people with clients with problems of uncertainty of life were more, who were requesting us to address their concerns, and the meaning, purpose, and the value of life. There are many whom we come across who think that their life is worthless. I don't know, after getting up, I don't know what to do. So I don't see any meaning in getting up. And there are some people out of despair, some because of various reasons, have suicidal tendencies. They come up saying that, no, I don't find any meaning in my life, right? So these are very interesting kind of people whom, if we can engage in philosophical counseling, they try to resolve their conflicting situations within the mind and try to come out of that. And as I said, the belief system is very important, because belief systems, we carry irrational beliefs, sometimes rational, sometimes irrational, sometimes inconsistent beliefs, and sometimes undetermined beliefs. We don't even determine them what they are. And sometimes we also carry false beliefs. So how do we address them? It is only philosophical counselor who can help us in addressing such kind of things. We don't even recognize this distinction that I have mentioned with regard to our belief system. Unless you do that, unless you try to be self-reflective, it is not possible. looking at the methods, there are various methods, different kind of methods that we find in philosophical counseling, like as I mentioned, Achenbach, he talked about open-ended method where there is no method that he follows. He argues for no method, because once you follow a method, for him the problem is, as I forgot, somebody has said this statement, if you have only hammer in your toolkit, you would find everything to be a nail, right? So similarly, if you have only one method with you, then you would try to resolve all the problems, some of the problems that may not be resolved with that method as well with that method. So that becomes a problem. So that's how Gerd Achenbach argues that there should not be any method. And Ran Lehav, that I have mentioned, he argues for deep philosophy. He advocates deep philosophy and worldview method. And there are various authors like Pere Grims. He argues for philosophical midwifery. And of course, Cohen, Elliot Cohen, that I have mentioned, he is the one who has developed logic-based therapy, and there are many methods that have come. So why I'm saying, talking about these methods is, it's not that the discourse is barren. The discourse is very rich. The methods that we have are plenty, and it is the heuristic methodology that people try to follow. It is not following only one method. So that is how the discourse is very rich, and but all this whole discourse, the various methods that we have, are oriented towards one aspect, that is self-reflection. Self-reflection is the basis, and we tend to help the client in becoming self-reflective, because we believe that by self-reflection, the individual tries to leads to self-assessment, and this self-assessment or self-analysis is the one which leads to self-understanding, and only after the self-understanding, self-transformation is possible. So all the while we are only talking about self, right? So then what is the role of the philosophical counselor? That's what comes into the picture, right? That is exactly what makes philosophical counseling different from other kinds of counseling. Okay, there are 4 questions, important questions that come into the picture. Who identifies the problem? It is not the philosophical counselor who identifies the problem. When you sit in a session, philosophical counselor helps the client to understand, identify the problem, and then, okay, if in other kind of counseling, it is the doctor or whoever, therapist who identifies the problem. But here in philosophical counseling, the client himself identifies the problem. And the second one is who resolves it. It is the client himself who resolves the problem. And who has to work for resolving it? That also will be the client. So what is the role of philosophical counselor then? If everything is being done by the client himself, the philosophical counselor, that is how we talked about the method of philosophical midwifery. He or she only helps the individual in identifying, by becoming self-reflective and self-assessing, and then self-understanding, and thus leading to self-transformation. So this is how it happens, and that is how philosophical counseling at the individual level, problem solving at the individual level is very important. And coming to the last aspect, like problem solving in the public domain, that is a part of the discussion. This is a very rich area, and it is not completely mapped. Okay, let me submit to you that it is not completely mapped. It is still a fertile area, open area, which is still not completely mapped, but we should also understand that in the public domain, it's not that everything is possible with philosophical counseling. Because when we say public domain, there are 2 things that come into picture. One is looking at the public domain in terms of the group or corporate. Okay, only these 2 domains in the public space that philosophical counselors around the world are addressing. They are not going beyond that. If some of them are going beyond that, in the sense that they establish something called philosophical cafe, which is open in the public domain, and they invite people to come together, and there are sessions like talk to your philosopher. Okay, like you may see Airtel umbrellas, right, with a table and a chair. Similar kind of table and kind of with a similar kind of table and umbrella. The philosophical practitioners would be sitting there with the label "Talk to your philosophical counselor." Okay, so that is how it has reached public domain and try to address the concerns of the individuals whoever want to have a dialogue and discussion, especially in book exhibitions. Philosophical counseling is a big hit. Okay, when it comes to the public domain, book exhibitions, philosophical counseling is a big hit in the at many places, and people who are interested in books do come to philosophical counselor and try to talk to them. And the problems of the public domain are to be still mapped very well and addressed in an articulated manner. But what I believe is, if we are able to address the issues at the individual level in a proper way, better way, the problems at the public domain also get resolved in a amicable way. So that is how I believe that if you can make the individual self-reflective, okay, the problems that you find in the public domain also slowly diminish. So that's how I look at it. And of course, it is not that the picture is completely rosy and philosophical counseling is flourishing, etc. Especially in India, okay, because almost 30 years back, there is an organization in Jaipur which has began with philosophical counseling, and it is not known to many people, right? So, and only luckily since last 3-4 years, we have various departments around the country which have accepted philosophical counseling as one of the papers in their courses, master's programs as well as bachelor's programs, like University of Kerala, University of Lucknow University and Chandigarh University, Delhi University and Bombay University have included papers of philosophical counseling and doing well. There are certain limitations that I see with regard to the theoretical framework. So theoretical framework seems to be a complicated one, especially when it comes to introducing a course. How do you develop this theoretical framework so that you can teach the course to students is a problem. Even while framing the syllabus for philosophical counseling at Delhi University, I have faced that. And also, since it is a completely speculative enterprise, it's not an empirical enterprise, it's a speculative enterprise, which has to avoid both these extremes, saying that everything is philosophy or nothing is philosophy kind of one. So that also makes the life of philosophical counseling in the academic enterprise a difficult kind of one. And the question that comes forward is, what is to be taught in philosophy departments in the name of philosophical counseling? Is it the knowledge or the skill? Because we mostly in philosophy departments around the country, we don't encourage any empirical studies, right? And we don't teach any skill in that sense, right? So how do we include philosophical counseling as a part of the program and teach theoretical aspect as well as the practicality? Of course, last semester we taught philosophical counseling, me and Dr. Navneet from Delhi University Philosophy Department, and we tried to give equal composition to the practical aspect as well. Because of the pandemic, we couldn't do well. I should accept that. So that is how the future is bright, only because all of you are interested. Okay, and there are people who are really struggling hard to sustain the significance and importance and continuously kind of contribute to the development of the discipline. And I'm sure Lucknow University will do well in supporting philosophical counseling as one of the prospective areas for the students. One of my concerns when I was thinking about this is, in Delhi University we give admission to 300 plus students for master's program, and only out of 350 probably 50 students get admission in research program, and probably one more 100 people would get admission elsewhere. But what about the remaining 200 students that we have after doing masters? What would they do? We have the obligation to show them some some prospects as well, right? And it is not that it doesn't have any prospects. So what are the prospects that we can look at? That is though we included the practical aspects of philosophy as well in the curriculum, and we are going ahead with that. So I thank the Department of Philosophy, especially Dr. Prashant. In fact, when Dr. Prashant contacted me, I told him, "You're the best one to speak on this topic." He is very enthusiastic and also a critical interlocutor. He doesn't leave anything without a critical scrutiny. So I consider him to be a very enthusiastic young friend who can contribute very well to this domain. And I thank Professor Rakesh Chandra and other colleagues who have joined us. Thank you so much. I stop myself here. Yeah. I'm sorry if I have taken much time.
No, thank you very much. I think.
Thank you.
I've gone beyond my time. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Balaganapathi, for this very beautiful and educative introduction to the whole world of philosophical counseling. We hope that in the future we will have many opportunities to learn more about it. There are 2 or 3 things which I thought would be important for us to understand from this lecture. One, very importantly, that actually philosophical counseling as a generic idea, that what is philosophical counseling? So philosophical counseling hereby comes as one way in which people with a certain set of problems get their problems resolved by somebody who's trained in philosophy. Now, the further question would be, as he rightly said, that who gets benefit out of it and what kinds of problems get sorted out. So, and I and Dr. Prashant were just sharing that if you take, for example, in the history of Indian mythology, you take the grand Bhagavad Gita as a word of counsel, and we take it as a word of counsel philosophically relevant, and which eggs the person finally into action. So it's an action guiding counseling to a person facing a moral dilemma. But there have been other occasions where the same 2 people appear in another part of the story, where Arjun has to marry Subhadra and Krishna counsel him to elope with her. That is not supposed to be a case which would generally be a wonderful case of philosophical counseling, because it only sorts out an immediate problem with a certain kind of an immediate answer. What Bala was saying, a certain kind of thing, where do I order my pizza from? That's the kind of a problem that he had, that, how do I elope with this young girl who happens to be your sister? Quite a wicked thing to do. But then, so there could be the nature of the problem and the kind of a resolution, a certain kind of a resolution which will be called philosophical. And that has to be that taking an individual from a specific case to the more general principles. And that is why I think the requirements which have been put forward by Professor Balaganapathi, that the person has to be self-reflective, rational, in a frame of mind, ready to go the whole hog, are the kinds of things which are extremely important for philosophical counseling. To me, it does seem that philosophical counseling is largely very closely related to philosophical teaching. So how philosophy is to be taught to students across the board. The other thing which I also thought was important for us to take away from Professor Balaganapathi's lecture is when he was talking about, and that's the question which we thought, because the kind of modesty that he's expecting from that, like a psychological counselor, that the counselor doesn't do anything, it's only the counselee who does it. And that's exactly, again, after all those Virat Roop Darshan and Karmanyavadikaraste, as well as Jitva Vabhokshase Mahim, finally what Krishna says, Yadicham Tad Kuru. But look at the response. Finally the response is, I shall do thy bidding. So I think that's something which I think we have to be worried about, that does the philosophical counselor take somebody down the whole lane? Finally, make him say that I am doing your own thing or not. And that's, I think, a general kind of a story which all people will have to do, and especially people who are self-reflexive. And in philosophy, we'll have to look at the history of philosophical counseling if we are going to relate to the other. The other big question, of course, is this, that if there's an idealist philosopher with a certain kind of epistemology, there's a Buddhist with a certain kind of a philosophy, there is a Bhakti Margi with a certain kind of worldview, their counseling would perhaps differ. And I think that is the way we also choose our counselors, that I go to a certain kind of a person who will match my temperament. So in this case, supposing I am looking for something which I worldly love and lost in worldly love, and somebody gives me this great yarn of renunciation, then I'm not too sure whether I'll be resolved. Maybe I need somebody like Ras Khan to give me that, okay, a life of love and the other. So it's not, to my mind, and this is what I wish to be clarified by Professor, would all philosophical counselors be of the same variety? Because I think philosophical counselors, if they have their histories in philosophy, because it's really more or less coming across like philosophical counseling is a generic way of addressing people. It's much like philosophical analysis, that philosophical analysis is a methodological kind of a thing. You analyze concepts, you look at the details of it, look at their interconnections, and then that is enough for resolving most of the problems by most of the kind of thing. That's the second kind of thing which I wish we will get clarity on. I the one very important thing, and I'm quite surprised why the Americans are not doing it. The biggest area which requires counseling is actually international politics. So talking to every individual and telling them that how you solve your individual problem is not the big problem. It's not the issue. The issue is who counsels Donald Trump. And you know that when you have Clinton and certain other people, they read John Rawls. They get their understanding from a certain kind of analytical philosophy and the kind of analytical consideration, how is justice related to equality, etc., etc., etc. Now, you can appeal to that and then get them to see the right thing. You can appeal to them and say that, you know, if you're talking about justice and equality, if you're talking about human rights, then you can't be doing these things. You can't be inconsistent. But if you have somebody as hard-headed as Trump, what do? So what is the task of the Grand Philosophical Counselors Association in America is also to counsel the powerful people and tell them that their acts impact the whole world. So when you are addressing individual people's in dilemma, the people who imagine they are not in dilemma, but who are actually putting everybody's life at stake also need to be counseled. So I do think that philosophical counseling is an extremely exciting, extremely useful area with a huge variety of opportunities. And if these people get together, take it back to their own respective things, they can really make a difference to the world. Because as the analytical philosophers thought at one time, a large part of the Nazi war would not have happened if they had actually seen the conflict which R.M. Hare said, that what I am asked to do with a part superior and what is my moral duty are not the same thing. So clarification of concepts, Hare thought, would have actually done much better had it happened in the continent. So thank you very much, and I hope that all the young people have many questions to ask you, and you are this absolutely fantastic teacher with a huge amount of experience and great amount of drive. We hope that our students in our university, when we start our course, will also be benefited by your wisdom. So please, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Rakesh Chandra, for raising certain kind of issues and clarifying certain things as well. Yeah, it is true that not every instance in the history can be picked up as philosophical counseling, as you rightly pointed out. The discussion of Krishna and Arjuna at two different instances. Yeah, that is one thing that we have to really take care of. The other important point is when we are talking about philosophical counseling, the problem can be philosophical, or if the problem is general, the methodology would be philosophical, or the philosophical theory would be used there. So these are two. This distinction is to be understood. So that's another point that I would like to make here. And the third one, as you have rightly pointed out, as you said this, like, is it that all philosophical counselors are of same variety? No, there are specializations in philosophical counseling as well on the basis of like various concerns that we have. For example, some of the philosophical counselors are only specializing in human relations. So they address the issues of human relation. And some of the philosophical counselors are focusing themselves completely on jail inmates and trying to address their concerns. And there is a different kind of categorization that we find in terms of the methodology that they use. And the distinction, the variety that we find is also in terms of the methodologies that they use. For example, as I mentioned, Achenbach says there is no method at all, heuristic, and you find many other philosophers who go with a methodology. Prairie Grimm's argues for philosophical midwifery, and Ran Lahav argues for philosophical deep philosophy. So in this way as well, there is a diversity that is existent, and that is how when a client wants to make a choice, there is a diverse field or diverse group of philosophical counselors who are available to address the concerns. In fact, I should inform all of you friends, American Philosophy Practitioners Association has launched a very interesting thing on their website, where their certified philosophical counselors are available 24 hours. Okay. And whenever you have a concern, you can go to the website and you can choose the philosophical counselor who is available at that particular point of time and have counseling. Of course, since it's a private organization, everything happens at a price. So that is to be kept in your mind. But otherwise, some of the philosophical counselors like Prashant and me could be available pro bono as well. Right? So that is one interesting thing that is happening. The other point, a very interesting thing that Professor Rakesh Chandra has pointed out, like people should try to address the issues at the international politics. Why is it that they're not entering into that? This is a very interesting thing. When we say who would counsel Trump, or who would counsel the X, whoever is in the power center, that is again individual philosophical counseling, right? So though we are seeing it, the impact of it at the international level, but it is the individual who is to be counseled there. And here, problem comes. Unless the other asks for philosophical counseling, you cannot provide philosophical counseling. That is the biggest limitation that we have. The client has to come on his own saying that I want this. That is why we don't get clients in India, though they may have problems, that they don't identify and they don't come forward saying that I want philosophical counseling. So that is the major problem that we face in the practice of philosophical counseling in India. But otherwise, thank you so much for your remarks, Professor Rakesh Chandra.
Professor Bala, I have a question. Would Delhi University be offering anything in philosophical counseling, so some of us who could pursue it as a course?
Yeah,
or does any university in India offer it right now, of course, in an online mode?
See, even I faced the same problem 1 year back. I tried to look around and see whether any agency in India which certifies philosophical counseling, but I did not find anybody. That's how I approached American Philosophy Practitioners Association, and we are all making an effort to establish all India organization which can certify philosophical counselors. So the attempts are under process, and probably very soon we would be able to materialize what we are thinking about. And we welcome your support in this regard. Thank you, Dr. Sudhanya.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you.
Professor Bala, hello. Thank you for the session. This is Kaush. I wanted to add what Ms. Sandhya said. will there be any interest group or any group which we can join, by which we can get any frequent updates in the development of this field, or any way by which we can contribute or learn new things coming in this field?
Yeah, there are sporadic attempts, but I'm saying we are going to come out with an all-India organization which provides complete information, and all of you are welcome to contribute to that and enhance the strength of the organization. So please, Kaush, please be in touch with us, and they'll definitely let you know the details. I'm providing my email address here. Those who are interested can write to us, so that we can keep you informed.
Sure, sir. Thank you.
Professor Bala. I'm Shailendra from Magadhi.
Yeah, Dr. Shailendraji.
I must congratulate you, sir, for becoming the pioneer for a new life in philosophy. In what way? One word I can say that this is the real concern. We academician in field of philosophy facing two kind of pressure. One kind of pressure is that our number of students are really decreasing, and people are worried about our future. Second one is that anybody from outside, from the domain of philosophy, very easily blame about what the philosophers in academia are doing really for philosophy. Nobody asks this question from an economist, that what are they really doing for the economy, and why the economy is decreasing. The economist are responsible. But everyone in society is feeling so before are so many people. But I'm happy that in India and in this thing is taking place.
Yeah, in between you lost the connectivity. Hello. Yeah, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
See, so I agreed one thing from Professor Rakesh Chandra. He was my mentor during my PG days. That activism, philosophical activism, is really necessary in form of philosophical counseling, as it happened actualized in the case of feminism. There was activism in between the range of philosophy and women issues, and you see there are many pressure group for the gender perspective, and the laws are being changed and situation is getting better. So this kind of activism is really necessary. We must have to formulate the actual procedure. Actually, when I attended few sessions, I just saw that everyone gets a certificate in West and trying to counsel the people that we are here. We have a long tradition of counseling in our own department. Once we can adopt this system within our framework, of course, like we included Bhagavad Gita, we included many texts, but if we reformulate it into the forms of dialogue and prescribe it like a counselor and counseling methodology, I'm not clear that how it will take shape, but it could be done. So within the framework, we can start an activism within the departments of philosophy. And earlier we have communicated with each other for your communicating philosophy as a community level. So that was also the wonderful idea which can promote this subject. I have to say many things, but thank you so much. Your voice is really very sweet at this time, and listening you is something realization kind of, and this is required from our philosophy teachers also in the department. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shailendraji, for those kind words. Basically, with regard to the student strength that we are talking about and the subsequent related issues, see, basically, philosophy is not in the public epistemologies. No, that is the major problem. And even if it is there in a very little form, it is completely in a wrong way. No, the people have misconceptions about philosophy more than right understanding of it. And I'm very sure we should have, as you are talking about philosophical activism, I don't know philosophical counseling can be considered to be a part of philosophical activism, but if at all we consider that, that is fine. But I would say that we should all work for public philosophy or philosophy on public platforms. Academicians should not limit themselves to only armchair philosophizing, and they should go beyond that, because knowledge is contributed by not just by academic departments, and beyond that knowledge comes into picture. So that is how we should make public debates on philosophy, so that people would recognize the importance of philosophy. Okay, that is how we can take philosophy into public epistemology strongly, and then things would change. Right. Thank you so much for your kind words. Yeah.
Sir, I have a question.
Yeah.
Hello.
Tulika.
Hello.
Okay. So this thing about the philosophical midwifery thing that you just mentioned, it is quite interesting, but I would just like to know, how does this really work? When we are confronted with the disturbing events that have occurred in a counselee's life, how do we find that locus of evaluation? Like, I just want to know how to just be connected with it, but still yet detached with it. Because when we get to know about the traumas, those are yet like very disturbing. So could you please help me with that?
Yeah, basically, this philosophical midwifery is a dialogical process in which the client is made to understand the internalized irrational beliefs. Okay, see, the delivery is blocked because there are irrational beliefs which are blocking the way. Okay, so internalized irrational beliefs are to be clarified so that the client comes out with his own thinking in a fresh way. That is how philosophical midwifery is understood. Okay, and that is how they talk about self-imposed blocks. All of us, we impose blocks on ourselves. Okay, we think that we are free. We think that we are exercising our freedom. In fact, we exercise our freedom within the narrow domains of our own self-imposed blocks. So philosophical midwifery basically helps us in coming out of such kind of things, and trauma, etc., that you're talking about. Trauma, I'm not denying that trauma will not be there, but trauma gets exaggerated because of these self-imposed blocks, etc. And if you can clarify that, then the severity or the way it affects you would definitely be in a different way. So that's where philosophical midwifery works with regard to this internalized irrational beliefs and also self-imposed blocks. These are the important things that philosophical midwifery tries to address.
Hello.
Yeah, we can all have a discussion on this, Tulika, if you're interested.
Yes, sir, sure.
Hello.
Thank you so much,
Hello.
sir.
Hello. Yes, Pranam sir. I'm Abhin Sham from University of Lucknow, and it would be so kind of you if you could just enlighten me on two of the questions of mine, which I had. Very fundamental questions, sir. So the first question came into my mind that when you said that Socrates, when you said in one of your lectures, which I found on YouTube, you said that Socrates was a philosopher. So Socrates was a philosophical counselor. So how is it possible that a philosophical counselor like Socrates can work in the common life? Because we see him exchanging dialogues with a group of philosophers called sophists, which are in my opinion not so quite common in daily lives. Because who would ask in the real life? Who would ask that what is the meaning of good, or who will ask that what is? And even if that philosopher comes to know, even if the layman comes to know that okay, this is how we should approach the good. So the second question comes into my mind with regarding this: isn't it a clear risk of the philosopher, that is the advisor, contaminating his advice with his own partial views, since the advisor knows that his positions are up for debate because it's philosophy, obviously. So if the positions are up for debate, but since the advisee, that is the one who is getting the counseling, is not a philosopher, he may not have the philosophical equipment to relativize his advisor's view in different lights and may take it as it revealed truth itself. Like, do we have something of philosophy of philosophical counseling, where we explore questions like, is it ethical for a philosopher to act as an advisor, or how much of psychology should such philosopher, such an advisor know, and what point of time should he recommend a more medical route to his advice? And the most puzzling question which came into my mind, that is it ethical not to recommend psychotherapy to your advice if you don't believe in your philosophy of psychotherapy at all? If a philosopher don't believe in psychotherapy at all, or he doesn't think that it is philosophically sound. Thanks, sir.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Abhin Shyam, for these interesting questions. In fact, I remember 1 year back, I called Prashant, and we had a 1 hour discussion on philosophical counseling. That was our first discussion that we had. And these very points that he pointed out, that so I am reminded of that discussion. Thank you so much for pointing out them again, Abhin Shyam. Is it that's why I said in the beginning itself, I gave a correction saying that I don't subscribe to the view that everything under the sky is philosophical counseling, or every attempt that you see in history of philosophy can be considered to be philosophical counseling. But at the same time, I also, since you have clearly quoted me saying that I said this in one of my talks, saying that Socrates was a philosophical counselor. Yeah, I have said that. I do remember that I have said that. So that is how let me respond to this first interesting question that you have raised. It is true, Socrates was addressing sophists. Okay, it may be true that he was not addressing ordinary people as you consider ordinary. No? But here, what I'm trying to understand is, look at the kind of questions that he is raising. Okay, and the process of the dialogue. He is helping the other in understanding rationally the limitations of his or his perspective, the other's perspective. So this is how we consider that to be philosophical counseling. Okay, so it is basically that's how I say you have to pick up the context. Okay, you have to pick up the method. You have to pick up the tool from history of philosophy, which can be used in the contemporary times. Okay, so that is how people have taken Socrates to be the symbol of philosophical counseling. By some of them have done that, but otherwise, few others have taken a completely different kind of standpoint. So we cannot find fault with anybody for choosing something. But I also consider him to be philosophical counselor from my own perspective, that he helps the other in understanding rationally the limitations of the perspective that he is holding, and helps him in overcoming that. Okay, so this is very important to me, and that is how I consider it to be that. Second point is very important. In fact, I have been thinking and trying to write something on that. What are the limitations of philosophical counselor? Do you think that philosophical counselor is not at risk, or is not putting the client at risk? No, this is a very important question. Sometimes, in fact, when I was conceptualizing philosophical counseling, a session of philosophical counseling, I said this at many places. Prashant also may remember that. I said the philosophical counselor is blindfolded and sitting in a chair blindfolded and listening to what counselee is saying, and he has to believe everything that the counselee is saying, and on the basis of that, he has to respond and help the counselee, right? So is it not a risky thing? See, you're completely blindfolded because you're only listening to him, and you have to believe whatever you listen from him. And if you believe whatever he says, and then you have to give him some suggestions, then it is really going to be a devastating kind of one, right? So probably both of them are in two different worlds. I mean, two different language games, if you follow Wittgenstein. But here, Abhin Shyam, my friend, what I say is, what is happening interestingly here is the counselor, philosophical counselor, obviously will understand his limitations. And we stress it, we do talk about ethics of philosophical counselor, where if he thinks he is not capable of handling a particular situation or a case or a client, he should refer to the other. Okay, if it is a psychotherapy or whatever it may be, it has to be referred. Okay. So what is being stressed in the philosophical counseling classes is you should accept only what you can handle. Okay. Because it is not that everybody can do everything. We understand the limitations of each one of us. So taking that into consideration, he should accept only that he can manage and handle. That is number one. Number two is, it is not that philosophical counselor would be harming the counselee if he accepts after due reflection, because self-reflection is required on the part of both counselee and the counselor. Okay, so that is how the counselor tries to help the counselee in reaching out to his own conclusions. Okay, it becomes a problem only when the counselor gives the prescription. You do this. Okay, this is the medicine for you, and you have to do this kind of things. Only then it is a problem. But in the process of a dialogue, whatever the counselee says, that would be addressed and analyzed in a systematic way by using various philosophical tools, or suggesting a work of philosophy to the client and ask him to read and reflect on that and come back. Okay, this is called bibliotherapy. So this is the process through which we try to go. So it is not just prescribing a wrong medicine to a person, right? It doesn't happen that way. So this is a completely different kind of system that operates. And if we are clear about it, then I think it would work really in an effective way. So thank you so much for raising these interesting questions.
Hello.
Good afternoon, sir.
Hello.
Yeah, I see